A German shepherd limps out of the forest, blood trailing behind her. Her son, just a pup, stands beside her, howling at a quiet house on the edge of town. Inside, a man hears, but doesn't move. Not yet. Why did the dog come here? What was she trying to say? And what happens when the man finally opens the door? Will leave you speechless. Watch till the end. This story isn't just about a dog, it's about a miracle. The fog curled low across the snowy earth like a ghost that had forgotten where it belonged. Every tree in the borderland forest of Lake Haven stood stiff with ice, their limbs bowed under the weight of winter. Somewhere between the frostbitten trunks and whispering wind, two figures moved, one larger, careful, and steady, the other smaller, agile, and curious. Jasper, a 3-year-old German shepherd with a lean build, black and tan coat, and a scar down his left ear, trotted closely behind his mother. His eyes, alert and gold-flecked, scanned the underbrush for movement. Though born in the wild edges of the forest, Jasper carried the echo of training, a sharpness, a learned focus, remnants from a time before he was abandoned, long before the quiet bond with his mother became his only anchor. His mother, older, more battle-worn, bore the stoicism of a shepherd that had seen too much. Her fur had dulled with age and hardship, matted at the haunches, but her eyes were alive, hardened, but intelligent. Once, a long time ago, she'd trusted humans, enough to let a one-armed man wrap a bandage around her leg when a storm nearly killed her. It was that kindness that taught her to guide her pup near the human border, toward scraps and warmth, but never too close. Today was colder than most. Food was sparse, and Jasper could feel the hunger in his bones like a ticking drum. They sniffed along a trail carved weakly through the snow by other dogs, those less lucky or already gone. When the mother stepped forward, her paw landed on something unnatural beneath the powder, a metallic clink. Then, a snap. The scream that followed wasn't a full-throated howl. It was torn, ragged, half-choked by blood and shock. Jasper leapt back as his mother thrashed, one of those cruel iron traps clenched tight around her neck. Not her leg, her neck. The mechanism had been buried under snow, set high, like someone knew dogs would sniff at bait hanging low. Blood spattered the white around them, a blooming rose of horror. Jasper lunged forward, trying to tear at the trap with his teeth, his paws scraping snow and metal alike. But the jaws held. His mother convulsed, her hind legs slipping. Every movement caused the trap to tighten. Panic overrode training. He licked her face, nuzzled her ribs, barked wildly, but her breathing grew wet, gurgled. Her eyes, once steady, darted in pain. And then, silence. Not death, but something colder. Helplessness. Jasper looked up at the forest edge. The border was near. A stone path, a chain fence, and beyond it, the city. And somewhere past that, a house. It wasn't just any house. A low, one-story structure, old but cared for, tucked between a closed-down bike shop and a mailbox shaped like a squirrel. Jasper had only been there once, a long time ago when his mother could barely walk after the blizzard. The man there had helped, not with shouts or rope or cages, but with quiet hands and warm water. His scent was gentle, his voice like gravel softened by years of solitude. Jasper ran. He tore across the frost-thick underbrush, bounding over logs and ditches, his breath a plume behind him. Streetlights appeared like tired suns behind the fog. Snowbanks became sidewalks. Cars passed in silence. He skirted alleyways and dumpsters, leapt fences, and slid across ice-slicked alleys. Behind the fogged window of a modest house, Silas Hartley stood barefoot on cold tile, hands wrapped around a ceramic mug. He was in his early 40s, but looked older, not from time, but from memory. His broad shoulders had once carried ladders and axes as a fireman. Now they carried silence. He wore a flannel shirt too big for his frame, tucked into worn jeans. Where his left arm ended, just below the elbow, a leather strap secured a simple prosthetic, which he rarely used outside the workshop. Silas lived alone, his only companions being Figaro, a sleek European starling who'd learned to mimic his cough, and a row of wood carvings along the shelf. Dogs, mostly. Some with tilted heads, others frozen mid-run. He hadn't carved a new one in months. The knock came at 3:07 a.m. Not a human knock, not fists, but a series of sharp scrapes, claws dragging across wood, then a deep, tremulous bark. Silas set down his mug and opened the door. There, standing on trembling legs, fur crusted in frost, and eyes wide with desperation, was a German shepherd. It took Silas a moment, but he recognized that scar on the ear, the way it tilted its head just before barking. It was the pup from last year, now grown, but unmistakably the same. The dog barked once, then turned, ran 3 steps, turned back, pleading. Silas didn't hesitate. He grabbed his winter coat, wrapped gauze and bolt cutters into an old duffel, and followed. At the same moment, across the city, in a dimly lit veterinary office filled with rescue cages and maps, Dr. Eloin Virel reviewed footage from a drone. At 39, Eloin looked like someone who belonged to the forest. Auburn hair, always in a half-loose braid, cheekbones proud, eyes sharp like a hawk's. Years of working in animal rescue had made her hands calloused, her voice calm, and her trust slow to form. She was raising her son alone after a quiet divorce from a man who considered her work a waste of energy. Atlas Virel, age 13, hunched beside her. Tall for his age, all limbs and tech obsession, with a constantly smudged hoodie and digital tablet always within reach. He didn't smile much, but his mind moved faster than most adults. He specialized in building simulation software, programs that mapped animal movement patterns in wild spaces. "Look," Atlas said, tapping the screen. "We've lost another tracker here. That's the 4th dog this week, always near the southeast border." Eloin narrowed her eyes. "That's too regular, too targeted." She tapped her pen against the desk, a rhythmic, nervous tick. "We need to get someone to sweep that area. Someone quiet." "I'll fly the drone again," Atlas offered, already loading coordinates. "But if it's traps, we're running out of time." As the drone's low whir lifted through the snowbound night, across town, Silas Hartley followed the footsteps of a dog he barely knew, into a forest that held pain, metal, and memory. The fog swallowed them both. The door creaked shut behind Silas Hartley as he stepped back inside, the duffel bag slung over his right shoulder, snow clinging to the worn soles of his boots. The frozen shepherd was gone now, vanished into the dark and swirling white, and all that remained inside the quiet kitchen was the fading echo of urgency. The house, modest but filled with the scent of cedar shavings and oil from wood-carving tools, seemed to exhale with his return. On the kitchen counter, a tea kettle let out a soft whistle before silencing itself again. Figaro, the starling, shifted inside his cage but made no noise. Even the birds seemed to sense the shift in the air. Silas placed the duffel on the table and let his gaze drift to the carving he had been working on before Jasper's arrival, a rough bust of a dog's head, unfinished. He turned it away from himself. There was no time now for memories or artistry, only necessity. He bent to stoke the small cast-iron stove nestled in the kitchen corner. The flames crackled back to life, orange and flickering, painting the room in warm shades of gold and rust. The kitchen light overhead, an old enamel lamp with one flickering bulb, hummed faintly as if protesting the storm outside. Silas moved slowly, not from age, but caution. Every gesture was deliberate. His body, especially his shoulders and spine, had grown used to compensating for the missing limb. The weight of the past hadn't dulled his instincts, only made them quieter. He reached for a wool scarf hanging near the back door and slipped his prosthetic into the sleeve with practiced ease. It was an old model, the kind more useful for leverage than dexterity, but it would hold the flashlight. He packed gauze, antiseptic, 2 wooden dowels, in case he needed splints, and bolt cutters into the canvas bag. Then, with a final glance at Figaro, who blinked once as if in acknowledgement, Silas stepped into the storm. Meanwhile, across town, neon lights reflected off puddles in a poorly lit alley behind a building that proudly bore the sign Canwell Canine Center. Inside, beneath fluorescent lights buzzing like angry hornets, a group of sharply dressed individuals sipped dark roast coffee and stood before a digital presentation detailing breed standardization efficiency and retention protocols. At first glance, the meeting could have been a mundane kennel planning session, except for the security guards near every exit and the fact that none of the participants looked particularly interested in dogs. At the edge of the room, a woman stood, arms crossed over a maroon wool coat, the press badge clipped to her lapel reading Cassandra Hill, Lake Haven Daily, but her real name was Era Bloom, and she hadn't written for the Daily in over 2 years. Era was 33, slender and intense, with ash blonde hair tied back in a high bun. Her skin bore the pallor of someone who preferred the glow of screens and moonlight over daylight, and her gray eyes missed nothing. She had made a name for herself, dismantling illegal exotic animal trades via long-form blogs and exposés under the pseudonym Canine Truths. After a brief stint in journalism school, she had ditched the rules of traditional media in favor of going rogue. With considerable success and a few close calls, her calm demeanor was misleading. She had once hidden beneath a rhino carcass for 6 hours to record poachers in Zimbabwe. Tonight, Era was watching and recording. The so-called training center was a front. The dogs brought in were often strays or from illegal backyard breeders, most never registered or microchipped. The presentation slides had changed. Now they showed diagrams of facilities with small kennels, numbered and color-coded. Ideal for non-vocal breeds, the presenter was saying, pointing with a laser to a pen labeled Series 9, Silent Intake. Her stomach turned. Era tapped her phone discreetly, sending encrypted footage directly to an encrypted folder, and from there to the inbox of one man, Detective Vale Cruz. Detective Cruz was in his mid-40s, Puerto Rican by heritage, with a shaved head and a neatly trimmed goatee. He wore his past in the lines of his brow and the way he glanced twice before stepping through any door. Once an undercover agent specializing in illegal wildlife trade, Cruz had been stationed in Lake Haven under the radar after a high-profile bust turned political. Officially, he was part of the Environmental Compliance Bureau. Unofficially, he was hunting again. Cruz sat in a small office inside the city precinct, lit only by the blue glow of a single computer monitor. When Era's email pinged through, he didn't hesitate. He leaned forward, clicked open the video, and grimaced. He picked up his phone and dialed. "You were right," he said, voice low. "They've rebranded. They're moving dogs through the front, and something worse through the back. Might not just be breeding or fighting." Era, back in her car, responded without preamble. "You'll need a warrant, but I'll get more. I'm going in deeper." Cruz sighed. "Don't get too close, Bloom." "You know me," she said. "I'm already inside." Back in the woods, Silas moved steadily through the snow, led by Jasper, who reappeared at the edge of the tree line like a ghost made of shadow and breath. The dog didn't bark again. He simply turned and ran, pausing only to ensure Silas followed. They moved like that for 20 minutes, through narrow deer trails and frozen ravines. At last, they reached a shallow gully. There, beneath a half-collapsed log, was Jasper's mother. Her body was curled tight, one paw twitching in pain. The trap had sprung around her neck, but now hung loose, cracked at the joint where Jasper had likely battered it in desperation before fleeing. Blood had frozen at the edges of her fur, and one of her eyes was closed, swollen. Silas approached slowly, murmuring as he went. He knelt beside her, unzipped the bag, and began his work. Jasper stood beside him, unmoving, watching with eyes that shimmered with something beyond animal instinct, something like memory or faith. Silas wrapped the wound, cleansed it with water warmed from his flask. The older shepherd whimpered once, but did not snap or struggle. Her breathing was shallow, but she endured. When he finished, he wrapped her in a blanket from his bag and lifted her carefully into his arms. As they walked back toward the city lights, Jasper paced beside them, ears alert, tail high. Behind them, the trap lay cracked and bent in the snow, its teeth silent now, buried in the bloodied white. The dawn did not rise in Lake Haven. It crept. A dim silver light pressed weakly against the frost-covered windows of Silas Hartley's home, a reluctant reminder that time moved forward even when grief wished it wouldn't. Inside, the warmth of the wood stove fought back against the chill that clung to the walls. In the center of the living room, a quilted dog bed had been pulled close to the fire. On it lay Jasper's mother, her breathing shallow but steady, wrapped in 2 layers of old fleece and a wool blanket that once belonged to Silas's late father. Her eyes, once alert and watchful, were now lidded and drowsy with pain. Silas crouched nearby, tightening the last section of gauze along her flank. His fingers moved with the same care he gave to carving, slow, exact, but lacking nothing in strength. Though he had only one hand, his prosthetic elbow braced the bandage roll while his calloused right hand worked the tape into place. The bite marks around the trap wound were raw, the skin blackened where frostbite had begun its merciless crawl. A blood-colored bloom had seeped through the center of the bandage, and one droplet had dried just behind the old shepherd's ear, staining the coarse fur like a tear that had refused to fall. Jasper sat close, his nose pressed against his mother's side. His tail had long since stilled, and the low keening sound he made each time she stirred was not quite a whimper, but something deeper, something ancient. His fur was dusted in powdery snow and a few dried blood specks from the journey back. He had not moved far from her side since they returned. Even when Silas had attempted to lure him with food, a bowl of reheated venison stew, Jasper had ignored it. Silas sat back on his heels and exhaled, finally letting the tension slip from his shoulders. His face was a map of fatigue, stubble more gray than black now, shadows beneath his eyes that seemed permanent. But his gaze remained sharp, watching both dogs with the quiet vigilance of a man who understood the fragility of moments like these. He turned toward the window, where the first blush of morning painted the frost in gold and rose. Somewhere out in that lightless forest were others. Traps. People. Questions he hadn't asked in years were beginning to stir again. Across town, inside the low brick building of the Lake Haven Veterinary Outreach, the air was thick with coffee, data streams, and the faint scent of antiseptic. The clinic doubled as a tech lab on the weekends thanks to Atlas Varel, whose laptop hummed beside a stack of drone footage and open schematics. Atlas, 13, had a tall, wiry frame and an unintentional slouch that came from too many hours spent hunched over blueprints. His hair was a constantly messy halo of brown, and his glasses, round and perpetually sliding down his nose, gave him a slightly owlish expression. He sat cross-legged on a rolling stool, one bare foot bouncing anxiously as he watched digital nodes connect across his monitor. Each point represented a tagged stray or known canine, part of the city's GPS program for non-adoptable rescues. Atlas had developed a program that layered movement data with topographic mapping and timestamp analysis. And this morning, the dots weren't moving. They had stopped, 5 of them, in a perfect crescent along the southern edge of Lake Haven's nature corridor. He looked up. "Mom?" Dr. Elowen Varel entered the room, still pulling her hair into a low braid. She had the calm efficiency of a woman who had built a life out of quietly saving things others deemed broken. Her frame was slim and athletic, years of lifting dogs onto tables giving her arms a deceptive strength. Her Irish roots showed in her fair skin and sea glass green eyes, though she had lost the accent long ago. "What is it?" she asked, crossing to his side. "They've stopped moving," Atlas said, pointing to the screen. 5 dogs, same sector, within 72 hours. Elowen leaned in, brow furrowing. "Where exactly?" "Here." He expanded the satellite view, revealing a dense stretch of forest just beyond the eastern construction zone. The label blinked. Terra Verde Future Eco Site. Elowen's lips pressed into a line. "That's the place they said would stay untouched until next spring." Atlas didn't look away from the screen. Someone lied. Back at Silas's home, he stood beside his workbench in the back room, a space that smelled of cedar, varnish, and old winters. From a rack of antique tools, he pulled a chisel and a sharpening stone. His prosthetic arm had been removed for now, replaced by a leather strap he used to brace when carving. The motion of preparing tools steadied him. It was a ritual he understood. But today, instead of turning to the unfinished carving on his desk, he reached into his duffel and withdrew the trap. It had been snapped open, jagged teeth smeared in dried blood, one side bent at a sharp angle where he'd wedged his carving mallet to break the joint. Silas set it on the bench and stared at it. It was high-quality steel, newer than most. Not the sort of thing a random poacher would use. No rust, no wear. It had been set recently, with precision. He lifted a magnifying glass and examined the base. A small etched code was engraved at the hinge. LV74. He wrote it down. Then he took a photo and texted it to the only contact he still had from his brief involvement with the fire department's wildlife outreach. Vale Cruz. Meanwhile, in a cafe 2 blocks from the city council building, Cruz sat in a booth with a paper cup of coffee going cold in front of him. He was reading Era Bloom's latest message when Silas's photo came through. He raised an eyebrow. The trap looked military grade. The timing wasn't a coincidence. He texted back, "Where did you find this?" Silas replied. "On a shepherd. Deep wound. Still alive. She's here." Cruz exhaled and rubbed his forehead. A chill passed through him that had nothing to do with the snow outside. Back in the living room, Jasper lifted his head as his mother stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, dry and glassy. Silas returned to her side and checked her temperature with the back of his hand. She was still warm, but barely. He dipped a cloth into a basin of warm water, gently wiping her muzzle, careful around the blood-matted fur. Jasper watched every movement, his eyes glinting with silent gratitude. Outside, the wind began to rise again. But inside, beneath the warm kitchen light and the gentle hum of the stove, something had shifted. A broken dog lay healing. A quiet man remembered what it meant to fight. And in a part of the forest once deemed unimportant, traps were snapping shut in patterns too perfect to be chance. This wasn't just about lost dogs anymore. It was a line drawn between silence and exposure. And it had begun with a single howl in the dark. Snow still blanketed the street in muffled silence as Silas turned the corner onto Ashwood Lane, his boots crunching faintly beneath him. The early morning light filtered through bare maple branches above, casting long, pale shadows across the pavement. The air smelled faintly of salt and pine smoke, and in his arms, wrapped tightly in a wool blanket and barely moving, Jasper's mother breathed shallowly, her weight feather-light, like something already halfway to fading. Jasper followed close at his side, tail low, ears half-pinned, his steps silent but deliberate. He didn't trust the city. Not yet. Not the smell of pavement, nor the distant hum of tires on wet asphalt. But he trusted Silas, or at least something in him did. They reached Silas's home, a modest single-story bungalow with moss growing along the edges of the shingled roof and a porch sagging under the burden of time. Figaro the starling chirped softly as they entered, his cage near the window fogged with condensation from the warmth inside. Silas gently lowered the dog onto the padded bed by the fireplace and unwrapped her. She stirred faintly, but didn't open her eyes. Jasper paced the perimeter of the room 3 times before settling beside her, nose pressed against her flank. He didn't growl, but his entire posture said, "Do not come closer than you need to." Silas knelt beside the hearth, stoking the fire until it roared back to life. Then, without a word, he stood, pulled his phone from his coat pocket, and dialed the number he hadn't used in 2 years. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Eloan Varel," said the voice, crisp, alert, and as familiar as ever, though a little more tired at the edges. Silas hesitated. "It's Silas." There was a pause, a longer one than comfort would allow. Then, "Where are you?" Eloan arrived 30 minutes later in a rust-colored station wagon with a cracked passenger mirror and a pile of dog blankets spilling out of the back seat. She parked with calculated precision, grabbed a green duffel embroidered with a faded white paw print, and approached the porch with the gait of someone who knew how to move quickly without spooking an animal. Or a man. She was still slight, just over 5 feet, with sharp cheekbones and that same sea-glass stare that used to read people too easily. Her strawberry blonde hair had more silver strands now, and her coat bore scratches from years of teeth and claws. Her boots were heavy, her hands calloused and stained with iodine. She didn't speak when Silas opened the door. She didn't need to. They stood in the threshold for 3 seconds, neither smiling, neither blinking, before she stepped inside, brushing past him. Jasper rose the instant she crossed the room, placing himself between her and his mother. He didn't bare teeth, but his eyes narrowed. Eloan stopped mid-step, crouched slowly, and let her bag fall to the floor with a thud. "Well, aren't you handsome?" she murmured. Jasper didn't move. "She's the one who helped her last time," Silas said quietly. "He doesn't remember. Or maybe he does and doesn't care." Eloan gave a single nod, then reached into her coat and produced a small packet of freeze-dried liver treats. She tossed one toward Jasper. Not too close. He sniffed it once, didn't eat it. But he sat down. That was enough. She approached the mother slowly, murmuring to herself. "Still breathing, lucky. But that's frost damage along the collar. Neck muscles look tight but not torn. She's dehydrated." Her fingers moved with practiced ease, checking temperature, gums, spine alignment. "She's got fight in her," Eloan said after a minute. "I'll give her fluids, antibiotics, keep her here, keep her warm, no stress." "I wasn't going to move her," Silas replied. Elowen glanced up. I meant you too. They didn't speak again for a while. At the same hour, across town, in a small municipal office painted beige and lit by buzzing fluorescent lights, Atlas Varel stood beside Detective Vale Cruz and pointed to a topographic map stretched across a conference table. Red dots blinked across the screen, each representing a dog whose signal had gone dark in the past 72 hours. 5 were clustered near the eastern edge of the Terra Verde project, an eco-development site currently paused for seasonal review. They said no one's working out there until spring, Atlas said, his voice quiet but firm. Cruz nodded, arms crossed over his chest. His frame was stocky, his button-down shirt rolled up at the elbows. Years of fieldwork gave his posture a permanent readiness, like someone always half expecting a door to slam open behind him. Cruz had a shaved head, skin the color of old leather, and the kind of eyes that never stopped scanning a room, even when he was still. He was once a specialist in wildlife trafficking cases in Arizona before being quietly transferred to Lake Haven after stepping on the wrong political toes. Out here, he did what he could under less scrutiny. You said you built this yourself? Cruz asked, gesturing to the mapping software. Atlas gave a nod. With some city data access, it updates in real time, except the collars go dark when something interferes, like someone jamming the signal. Or, his voice trailed off. Or they're removed, Cruz finished grimly. Atlas hesitated. I think it's someone inside the rescue program. Cruz arched a brow. That's a serious accusation, kid. I know, Atlas replied, but there's only one person who had access to these collars besides me. Who? Atlas swallowed. Dr. Branton. He's supposed to be my mentor. He helped design the signal network, but he's been showing up at Terra Verde planning meetings, and his office computer logged into a backup server I didn't authorize. Cruz studied the boy for a long moment. You tell your mom? Atlas shook his head. Not yet. She trusts him. I did too. All right, Cruz said, straightening. Let's do this clean. You feed me data. I'll handle the people. But if we push this, there's no turning back. Atlas met his gaze. I don't want to turn back. At the house on Ashwood Lane, Elowen was packing up. Jasper's mother now slept soundly, her breathing deeper, steadier. Jasper remained beside her, his head occasionally lifting at the creak of a floorboard, but he no longer bristled at Elowen's presence. Silas stood near the kitchen sink, washing out a tin bowl in silence. Elowen leaned against the wall beside the fireplace. Same dog from last year, she said finally. Yes. She remembered the way. Yes. Elowen looked at him, softer now. And you still remember how to care. He didn't answer, not out loud, but something in his posture shifted. She stepped to the door, her bag slung over one shoulder. I'll come by tomorrow, keep her hydrated, and feed him. He looks like he's forgotten how to eat. Silas nodded once. Thanks. She paused. Silas? He looked up. You didn't call me last time. I didn't know if I was still someone who could. Her eyes held his. Maybe you still are. She stepped out into the snow. Inside, the fire crackled. Figaro sang once, and Jasper rested his head on his mother's back. 2 pasts had crossed in that living room, unspoken but felt, and neither had run. The storm had quieted by morning, but the cold held fast to the windows like a warning. Frost bloomed in fragile webs along the glass panes, and the wind outside creaked against the eaves of Silas Hartley's house, like something forgotten, scratching to be let in. Inside, warmth hummed gently from the cast-iron stove. The mother shepherd lay on her side, her body still blanketed, but her breathing had grown shallower, more strained. Her eyes opened in flickers now, and sometimes not at all. Silas had placed a small ceramic bowl of water beside her, but it remained untouched. Jasper sat like a statue at her side, his ears tilted back, his body curved protectively around hers. He had not moved except to breathe. When Silas entered the room, carrying a folded towel and the smallest syringe from Elowen's kit, Jasper's gaze shifted, cautious but not hostile. Silas knelt beside her and murmured something under his breath. It wasn't a prayer exactly, but it had the same shape. His hand brushed lightly along the shepherd's ribs. They felt more fragile than they should have, and beneath his fingers he could sense the labored motion of her lungs. There was a soft knock at the door. He opened it to find Elowen Varel, wrapped in a forest green parka, snow clinging to the cuffs of her jeans. Her braid hung over her shoulder, and in her gloved hand she held a black vet case worn smooth at the corners. She stepped inside without waiting to be invited, the way someone does when they've been through this kind of moment more times than they'd care to admit. "She's fading faster," Silas said, voice low. Elowen crouched beside the dog without a word. She moved gently, unzipping her bag and removing a hypodermic case, a sterile chip sealed in plastic, and a set of soft antiseptic wipes. Jasper tensed as she approached, but Silas laid a hand on the young shepherd's shoulder. Jasper didn't growl. He simply stayed, watching. "She needs fluids, a broad-spectrum antibiotic," Elowen said. "I'll implant the chip too. That way, even if something happens and she ends up back in the system, they'll know she mattered." She inserted the needle with practiced speed, sliding the chip into place near the shepherd's shoulder blade. Then, she wiped the injection site and gave the second shot. Thicker, deeper. The mother let out a soft moan, her legs twitching slightly, but she didn't resist. When it was done, Elowen sat back on her heels, her expression unreadable. "We've bought her time, but that's all it is." Silas nodded, standing to fetch a bowl of warmed broth from the kitchen. The moment felt heavy, as if it belonged in silence, but after a few minutes he spoke. "Her name's not hers, you know. I mean, we don't know it," he said, setting the bowl down. "I just call her Shepherd, but she was someone else's before. You can tell. She's got this posture like she used to wait at a door every evening, like she expected someone to come back." Elowen glanced at him. "Like Rex." Silas's shoulders tensed slightly. "Yeah." He sat down, his back to the stove, one leg bent, the other outstretched. Jasper moved closer. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he rested his head on Silas's leg, still watching his mother with one eye. Silas didn't flinch. He rested a hand gently on the dog's thick fur and let it stay there. "Rex was a rescue," he said after a moment. "Came to me half-starved, half-wild. But he learned fast. Smartest damn dog I ever met. Saved 2 people from a house fire on Miller Avenue. One of them was a little girl, but when I lost my arm, when I couldn't go out on calls anymore, I guess I pulled away. From him. From everything." Elowen didn't interrupt. "One night he went missing. Gate was open. I don't know if he left or if someone... but he didn't come back." He was quiet for a moment, his fingers curling gently into Jasper's fur. "I think about him more now, since she showed up, since this one came to find me." "You don't have to do it all again," Elowen said softly. "You don't owe them your pain." Silas looked down at Jasper. "No, but maybe I owe them my presence." Elsewhere, under the bruised sky of Lake Haven's industrial edge, Era Bloom crouched in the brush behind a crumbling warehouse near the docks. She wore a charcoal gray coat and a knitted black cap pulled low over her ears. In her gloved hands, she held a compact drone controller, her breath steady in the cold. Her eyes flicked between the screen and the shadows beyond the fence. She looked younger when focused, angular features drawn tight with concentration. But there was an oldness in her expression, a weariness born from too many hours chasing ghosts and finding monsters. The drone feed on her screen showed grainy night vision footage from the previous evening. She scrubbed back frame by frame until it landed on what she needed. A white transport van. No logos, just mud-slicked panels and tinted windows. It pulled into the rear loading dock at 2:12 a.m. The footage showed 2 men unloading cages. No barking, no struggle. Silent dogs. Drugged, most likely. One man was tall, broad-shouldered, wore a camo jacket and a black cap. The other was shorter, with a limp in his left leg and a nervous tick in his neck. They carried the cages through the back entrance of the warehouse. On the side wall, briefly illuminated by a flicker of light, was a small stenciled code, TVD 114. Era's eyes narrowed. She zipped the footage into an encrypted file and transferred it instantly to Detective Vale Cruz. Then she powered down the drone, rose, and slipped away from the brush before the next shift arrived. Cruz received the footage at 6:04 p.m. He was still in the precinct, reviewing maps and reports, his fingers stained with highlighter ink. When he clicked open the video, he didn't blink once through its entire minute in 47 seconds. He tapped his desk twice, leaned back in his chair, and called Elowen. "You're right. he said when she answered. "It's not just one or two rogue traps. This is organized, big, and whoever's supplying them isn't worried about being seen." Elowen's voice was steady on the other end. "I think I know who's letting it happen." Cruz waited. "Dr. Branton." Cruz sat forward. "Atlas mentioned him." "He's been blocking requests for expanded collar tracking," she said. "Claims we're overstepping privacy protocols for unadoptable animals. Who talks about privacy rights for dogs?" "Someone with something to hide," Cruz muttered. "We move fast, before the dogs disappear." "I'm already in motion," Elowen said. That night, Silas sat beside the fire long after Elowen left. Jasper was curled against his side now, his body no longer rigid, but relaxed in cautious comfort. The mother shepherd slept deeply, her breathing now even. The air was still, safe. Then there was a sound, a low, warning growl. Not from Jasper, from the mother. Her eyes opened, fixated. Silas followed her gaze to the broken corner of the window pane, where wind whistled through a hairline crack. Outside, beyond the frost, a figure had stood, just for a moment, watching. But when Silas rose to look closer, the street was empty again. Still, something lingered in the air, like the scent of metal, like the silence before a trap snaps shut. Jasper woke before the sun. The fire in the stove had burned down to a dull red core, its warmth still humming in the quiet of the living room. Snow filtered softly outside, muting the world in white. The shepherd lay beside his mother's bed, head resting on his paws, eyes glassy from sleep. But something had stirred him. A sound, a scent, a shift in the air too subtle for any human to detect. He raised his head, ears twitching toward the window. A low, mournful whimper escaped his throat, and he rose to his feet. His mother, still wrapped in a thick wool blanket, gave a shallow sigh, but did not wake. Her breathing had improved, deeper, steadier, no longer strained, yet she remained in a fragile stillness, as if her body had to relearn the act of survival. Jasper turned toward Silas, who lay slouched on a recliner nearby, a heavy knit blanket pulled over his chest, the wood carving of a dog resting unfinished beside him on a side table. Jasper padded forward and placed his muzzle gently against Silas's hand. He didn't bark, he didn't whine, but his touch was insistent. Silas stirred with a grunt, blinked once, then focused on the shepherd's gaze. There was urgency there, purpose. Silas sat up, rubbed sleep from his face, and nodded. "All right," he said, voice rough with sleep. "Lead the way." He pulled on his boots, threw his parka over his flannel shirt, and grabbed his canvas duffel, already restocked with supplies, cutters, gauze, a field lamp. Before he stepped outside, he turned once toward the mother dog. "Shepherd," he murmured, "we'll be back." She opened her eyes for a moment, as if she understood. By midday, the snow had lightened into a powdery mist. The trees of Lake Haven's eastern corridor stood tall and silent, their trunks pale gray, bark streaked with frost. Jasper led Silas across a familiar deer trail, his nose close to the ground, moving in sharp angles, darting towards something only he could smell. His pace quickened near a shallow ravine, the same spot where his mother had been caught. But he veered left this time, disappearing into thicker brush. 20 minutes in, Silas spotted something unnatural, a glint of metal. He crouched, brushing aside the snow with gloved fingers. There, half buried beneath pine needles and ice, was another trap. High grade, spring-loaded, the same make. This one had been reset recently. Jasper let out a low growl. Silas took photos, then carefully jammed one of his carving chisels into the pressure spring. The trap hissed as it snapped shut with a violent clack, harmless now. He marked the spot with red tape from his bag and tapped a message to Elowen. Found another, same style, sending GPS now. Then he looked to Jasper. The dog was tense, sniffing the air, staring further into the trees. "Is there another one?" Silas asked softly. Jasper took off running. Across town, in a shared space carved from a converted storage unit, Atlas Varel and Era Bloom sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by open laptops, solar battery packs, and 5 screens displaying terrain data and signal decay maps. Atlas wore a gray hoodie 3 sizes too big, sleeves pushed to his elbows, fingers flying over a keyboard. His hair was even more unkempt than usual, his glasses slightly crooked. Next to him, Era sat with one knee pulled to her chest, her sharp features lit by the blue glow of the monitor. She wore a thermal jacket, her dark hair tied up, a pencil clenched between her teeth as she scrolled through drone footage. Era broke the silence first. "That's your sixth dead zone. Same perimeter radius, same timing." Atlas nodded. "I ran a comparative algorithm between the last 7 chip signal failures. They all vanished within 30 meters of these points." He pointed to glowing red markers on the forest map. "I've been calling them ghost zones. The chips go dark, no body recovery, no camera triggers. You think they're being blocked? Maybe," Atlas shrugged, "or destroyed. But here's the weird part. Each one sits just outside the Terra Verde parcel boundary. Like, just far enough that it isn't technically their property." Era sat forward. "They're hiding the traps on public land. If anyone stumbles on them, it's unregulated wilderness." Atlas glanced at her. "We could overlay your drone paths with my dead zones." Era grinned. "Now you're speaking my language." They got to work, syncing their systems. Era handed Atlas a USB drive, her hand lightly stained with graphite and dirt from the field. "Footage from last night," she said. "You won't believe what those vans are carrying." He took it, his expression darkening. "Are we going to show this to my mom?" Era hesitated. "We'll let Cruz decide, but yeah, eventually." Atlas bit his lip. "There's something else," he muttered. "The person who helped to design the chip system with me, Dr. Branton. I tracked his IP yesterday. He accessed the collar's override function." Era blinked. "He's erasing the dog's ID data?" "Looks like it. When a chip stops transmitting, it doesn't just go dark. It disappears from the registry, like it was never implanted." "That's not incompetence," Era said. "That's a system built to vanish animals." Atlas looked sick. "I trusted him," he said quietly. Jasper had led Silas to a clearing near a collapsed hunting shack, its roof caved in and the scent of rust heavy in the air. Beneath a half-frozen tarp lay another trap, this one different. 2, in fact, one with jagged teeth meant for larger prey. The other was a cage trap rigged with wire and a pressure plate inside. Beside it lay a torn piece of fur, the same color as the retriever mix Eloan had mentioned missing 3 weeks prior. Silas knelt to inspect the scene, only to feel a sharp prick on the back of his neck. Not pain, but awareness. He looked up and scanned the tree line. Nothing moved, but something had been here. He stood slowly and marked the location. "We need to report this now," he muttered, tapping his phone. But there was no signal. "Damn it!" Jasper paced beside him, his hackles raised. Silas turned. "All right, let's get out of here." Back at the clinic, Eloan paced as she waited for Silas's update. The mother shepherd had drunk water for the first time in days. Her body was still frail, but her eyes had opened fully now. She had licked Eloan's hand, a slow, deliberate gesture. She wasn't out of danger, but she was fighting. Vale Cruz entered through the side door, snow still melting from his coat. His face was stern, eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. "You heard from Silas?" he asked. "No," Eloan said, "but I gave him the backup satellite unit. He's probably just out of range." Cruz nodded. "I spoke to a source at the zoning office. Branton's name is on multiple exemption forms for temporary wilderness studies, all rubber-stamped by a planning board that doesn't exist. So Terra Verde's been planting baits on public trails and calling it research. That or cover for something worse." Eloan sighed. "We don't have time. The dogs are disappearing faster." Just then her phone buzzed. A text from Silas. "Found 2 more traps. No signal here. Returning now. Jasper still leading." Eloan read the message aloud, then added, "He's not alone out there." Cruz's jaw tightened. "Let's be ready when he comes back." As the sky darkened toward evening, Silas and Jasper finally emerged from the tree line, their boots and paws caked in mud and snow. The duffel bag was heavier with evidence, and Silas's shoulders sagged beneath the weight. When they reached the porch, Silas paused. Jasper stepped ahead and nudged open the door gently. Inside, the mother shepherd raised her head. Just barely, but she saw them. And for the first time, Jasper barked. Not loud, not urgent, but clear. A call, not a cry. He was home. But the hunt wasn't over. The snow had turned red, not from violence, yet, but from the light. Crimson beams from the tactical headlamps cut through the ever-falling flurries like warning flares, casting an eerie, artificial glow across the white wilderness. Every step crackled underfoot as the group moved into position, breath fogging in short, silent puffs. Lake Haven's eastern woods, once known only to hikers and stray dogs, had become a battlefield. Silas Hartley crouched behind a fallen tree, his gloved hand pressed against the worn grip of his carving mallet. Now repurposed as a striking tool, his breath was steady, his prosthetic arm affixed and ready. Beside him, Jasper stood alert, ears forward, tail rigid but not wagging. The shepherd had refused to stay behind. The moment Silas had begun packing for the operation, Jasper had followed him to the door and refused to budge. Elowen had only nodded once and said, "He knows what's his." A few yards ahead, Atlas Varel huddled beside a camouflaged surveillance box, laptop open on his knees. The screen cast a soft blue light over his pale face, revealing dark circles under his eyes and the determined set of his jaw. At 13, Atlas already looked older than most kids his age, not in body, but in expression. He wore a thick down coat borrowed from Cruz, its sleeves too long and bunched around his wrists, and a wool hat that kept slipping over his ears. He was syncing the last of the thermal imaging data to Era's drone. 2 targets on the move, same size, pacing between the bait cages. He whispered through the comms. 3rd heat signature near the van. Could be Branton. From a higher ridge, Era Bloom lay prone on her stomach, cross-scope binoculars trained on the clearing. Dressed in dark forest gear, her face partially hidden beneath a tactical balaclava, she resembled more of a scout than a journalist. But her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of truth. Tonight, she wasn't just gathering facts, she was about to become part of the story. To her left, Detective Vale Cruz waited in silence. He had traded his usual dress shirt and shoulder holster for a padded vest and plain black jacket. At 46, Cruz moved with the precision of a man who'd been in too many bad rooms. His breath was calm. His Glock was drawn, but not raised. He wasn't here to shoot. He was here to expose. Below them, headlights flickered on from a dark van hidden between 2 clusters of pine. 2 men stepped out, one tall and heavily built, the other lean with a limp and a nervous tic that made his head jerk slightly every few seconds. Both carried long black poles and taser units strapped to their belts, but it was the 3rd man who emerged last that froze Cruz's blood. Richard Hayne, the man standing at the van's rear, wore a black wool coat and leather gloves, his salt and pepper hair slicked back, eyes cold behind wire-rimmed glasses. Hayne was the public face of Terra Verde's environmental division. To the public, he was a polished executive known for green initiatives and animal-safe development. But to Cruz, he was the linchpin, the one who'd signed every permit, diverted every complaint, and buried every inspection. Hayne lit a cigarette and turned to speak with the others. Cruz caught enough through Era's lip-reader drone text feed. 2 more traps tonight. Dump the old ones. Get those animals loaded. The clearing went still. Cruz clicked his comm. Now. Everything happened at once. Silas and Jasper charged the North Ridge, just as Era's drone dropped from the sky and blared a screeching audio burst to disorient the targets. Atlas stood and shouted, "Police! Step away from the cages!" The taller man reached for his taser, but Jasper was faster. The shepherd launched forward, a blur of black and tan fur, colliding with the man's chest and knocking him flat. The weapon skittered into the snow. The second man turned toward Atlas, lunging, and that was when Jasper's mother appeared. No one had seen her until that moment. She moved like a shadow cracked open by light. Frail but fearless, she barreled through the line of trees with a hoarse growl rising in her throat. Her injured leg dragged slightly behind her, but it didn't slow her down. When the man swung the butt of his pole at Atlas, the mother shepherd threw herself between them. The sound of impact was dull and awful. She collapsed with a whimper as Atlas fell backward, untouched but shaking. "Mom!" he choked, crawling toward her. The man raised his weapon again, but Cruz was there. "Drop it!" Cruz bellowed, his voice cutting through snow and panic. The man hesitated. Cruz fired once, not at the man, but into the air. The pole dropped. Silas reached Jasper's mother first. He knelt beside her, pulling off his glove and pressing 2 fingers to her ribs. There was blood, but her eyes fluttered. She was breathing. "Still with us," he murmured. Jasper pushed past him, licking her muzzle urgently. Meanwhile, Era had her phone trained on Hain, who had attempted to slip into the trees during the scuffle, but Cruz caught him by the coat. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, cruelty to animals, obstruction, and illegal operation on state-protected land," he said. Hain didn't struggle. He only looked at Cruz with faint amusement. "You think anyone's going to care? Half the city council's on my payroll." "Not anymore," Era said, stepping forward. "Your face is about to be on every screen in the country." 3 hours later, the group gathered at the Lake Haven Community Center, repurposed for the night as a press hall. Richard Haines sat cuffed between two uniformed officers while Cruz stood behind a podium. Reporters snapped photos. TV crews rolled live feeds. "We have uncovered and dismantled an illegal trapping operation funded under the guise of ecotourism," Cruz announced. "We have confirmed the use of unauthorized tracking removal, unauthorized surgical sedatives, and falsified public records. This ends tonight." In the back row, Atlas sat with a blanket over his shoulders, his knees bouncing nervously. Next to him, Silas stood with Jasper on one side and the mother shepherd, now with a bandaged rib and IV drip, on the other. She rested her head on Silas's foot. Elowen leaned over and whispered, "She's stronger than I thought." "She always was," Silas replied. Era stepped into the spotlight for one final shot. "I hope the city sees what you tried to bury," she said to Hain as the flashbulbs lit the room. "But even if they don't, we will." Outside, the snow continued to fall, quiet again, peaceful. But somewhere deep in the forest, where traps had once waited beneath the ice, only paw prints remained. Spring arrived quietly in Lake Haven. The snow didn't vanish all at once. It retreated in slow, uneven lines across hillsides and alleyways, leaving behind damp soil, blooming moss, and paw prints that no longer led to traps. Birds returned before the tourists did, and among the trees the wind finally sounded like something alive again. On the edge of the forest, just past a narrow trail lined with young birch trees, stood a structure both new and familiar, a workshop of cedar and stone, its windows wide and welcoming, its porch strung with carved wind chimes that rang softly in the breeze. A wooden sign hung beside the door, carved by hand, "The Hartley Haven, Woodwork and Animal Healing." Inside, the scent of cedar chips blended with lavender and something faintly earthy, like clean fur and sun-warmed blankets. The front half of the building was a studio where Silas Hartley carved sculptures with his one good hand and the help of a precision-adjusted prosthetic. The back half, though, was where the real magic happened, an open space lined with thick mats, low cots, heating pads, and calm lighting, filled with the sounds of breathing, tail thumps, and soft instrumental music. Jasper lay in the center, tail curled around his legs, watching a younger dog, a skittish 2-year-old Labrador named Roscoe, take tentative steps across the room. Roscoe had once belonged to a man who ran illegal dogfights in the neighboring county. He still flinched at raised voices and barked in his sleep. But Jasper's presence grounded him. When the shepherd sat calmly, Roscoe followed. When Jasper drank, Roscoe drank. And when Jasper pressed his head gently to Roscoe's side, the lab finally stopped shaking. Silas watched it all from his workbench. He wore a gray button-down rolled at the sleeves, his beard now peppered with silver and trimmed shorter than usual. His movements were slower these days, not from age, but from peace. Beside him, the mother shepherd rested on a wool rug, her once wounded body now strong again. She didn't move as much as Jasper, but she greeted each dog that entered the center with a nudge or a silent stare that somehow conveyed comfort better than any words. She had no name still, not officially, but everyone who came to the Haven simply called her matriarch. She'd earned it. Downtown Lake Haven had changed too. Banners with the words, "Protect the wild to save ourselves," now hung in civic centers and parks. Where once stood Terra Verde's project banners, "Eco-luxury living for the future," now stood steel signs staked firmly into the earth. "Protected land, Lake Haven Canine Refuge, entry by permit only, no development authorized." The bill to redraw the forest boundary line had passed in record time after public outcry reached national headlines. Cruz's press conference, Era's drone footage, and the heart-stopping image of Jasper's mother shielding a child had circulated on every major network and digital feed. The nation hadn't just watched, it had responded. Within a month, Terra Verde's financial backers had pulled their investments. The corporation dissolved its eco division. Richard Hayne faced 6 federal indictments and 3 civil lawsuits. Lake Haven's mayor, a tall, soft-spoken woman named Janice Keller, called it a correction of moral course. Janice was known for her deliberate pace, but after her son, a quiet boy named Milo, had watched the video of Jasper saving Atlas, she'd cast her council vote without hesitation. Atlas Varel, now a few inches taller and with a touch more certainty in his stride, stood on the modest stage at the Lake Haven High Civic Auditorium, accepting the Lake Haven Youth Innovation Medal. He wore a pressed black suit jacket over his signature hoodie and held the award plaque with both hands, his fingers tapping nervously at the edges. His mom, Dr. Elowen Varel, sat in the front row, her eyes glassy but proud. Beside her was a man in a brown turtleneck and gray blazer, David Brill, a new council liaison for animal welfare. Kind-eyed and long-limbed, David had left his job in Boston's biotech scene to support Atlas's initiative after reading about the case. He had soft academic features, a subtle stammer, and a habit of holding his breath when nervous. He and Elowen had only just begun talking regularly, but there was something unspoken between them now, something forming gently at the edges. Atlas cleared his throat. "I didn't build this system to catch criminals," he said. "I built it to keep animals from vanishing. But maybe doing both is the same thing." Applause broke out. At the same time, inside a warmly lit bookshop on Main Street, Era Bloom sat behind a signing table stacked high with fresh copies of her new release, The One Who Heard the Bark, a true story of dogs, silence, and survival. The cover featured a black and tan shepherd standing in a snowstorm, eyes forward, body braced against the wind. Era herself wore her hair loose for once, the curls brushing the collar of her charcoal coat. Her sharp cheekbones were softer now, her eyes more at ease. When people came to ask for autographs, she didn't rush. She looked them in the eye, listened to their stories about dogs they had lost or dogs that had saved them. "Is it true?" a girl with freckles asked, holding up the book. "The mother dog came out of nowhere to save the boy?" Era smiled. "Yes, and she's still alive. You can meet her if you visit the Hartley Haven." The girl beamed. From across the room, Cruz watched from the sidelines, arms folded, a ghost of a grin on his face. He wasn't a man of crowds, but he had made an exception. After everything, he had stayed in Lake Haven. He now led the Wildlife Integrity Division. He had a new badge, a new team, and for the first time in years, he wasn't chasing shadows. He was building something. Back in the forest, the trail wound deeper into the green where the traps had once waited. Now, only camera towers and signs marked the ground, each programmed to identify movement, not for security, but for curiosity. Jasper still roamed freely. Each morning he left Silas's porch and disappeared into the trees. And each evening he returned, not always at the same time, not always from the same direction, but always when it mattered. He had become something more than a dog. To many in the town, he was a legend. To others, a symbol. But to Silas, he was just Jasper. One evening, as twilight bled purple across the sky, Jasper returned to the haven with 3 pups following behind him, ragged, filthy, but alive. The youngest, a floppy-eared mutt with one blue eye and one brown, was missing half a tail. Silas greeted them with a gentle smile and 3 bowls of food. Matriarch lifted her head, sniffed once, and then laid it back down with a sigh. The fire crackled. The chimes whispered. And Silas Hartley, who had once carved dogs out of wood to remember the ones he lost, now carved no more statues. He no longer needed to, because the real ones were home. Sometimes, miracles don't come with trumpet sounds or beams of light from the sky. Sometimes, they come on 4 legs, covered in snow, trembling, silent, until they teach us how to listen again. Jasper didn't just lead Silas out of his loneliness. He didn't just save his mother, or Atlas, or a city lost in comfort and greed. He reminded us of something sacred, that love, when selfless and unspoken, becomes a force greater than fear, stronger than steel, and purer than anything money could ever build. And maybe, just maybe, God doesn't always send angels in robes and wings. Maybe he sends them with muddy paws and eyes that carry sorrow and hope in equal weight. Maybe the miracle we needed was already waiting outside our door, just knocking, asking to be let in. So today, as you go about your life, walking your dog, feeding a stray, or sitting alone by a quiet window, ask yourself, what if the miracle is already near? What if all you have to do is open the door? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment and tell us your story of love, redemption, or a dog that changed your life. Subscribe for more stories that stir the heart and restore faith in humanity. And above all, may God bless you and those you love in every silent moment and every answered bark.